Welcome, everybody. On behalf of the AVAHO Board and the AVAHO Executive Committee, I'd like to welcome you to our third session of these programs that we've put together for our members and our supporters. You've already sat in on session one, which was on the role of the VA in providing quality healthcare to our nation's veterans. Session two focused on the role of the VA as a leader in providing medical healthcare training and education. And today, what we're going to focus on is the role of the VA in providing clinical research. We've put together an amazing panel of experts in the area of clinical research. And we also have asked one of our colleagues from AVAHO, Dr. Drew Moganaki, to serve as our moderator. Dr. Moganaki is a physician scientist at the West LA VA Medical Center. He's a physician scientist and co-director of the Lung Precision Oncology Program at the Greater West LA, professor and chief of thoracic oncology at the UCLA Department of Radiation Oncology, and the former chair of the AVAHO Research Committee. I'll ask Dr. Moganaki to introduce our panelists and to lead the discussion.
Thank you, Rusty. It is a distinct honor to introduce our three distinguished faculty speakers here. And the first will be Dr. Timothy O'Leary, who is a pathologist, retired from VA, who has served in some of the highest levels in central office in the research program. He is the former director of the basic science, clinical science, cooperative studies program, research programs, and also has been the chief research and development officer for central office. He has prior experience working at the NIH, the FDA, the Armed Forces Institutes of Pathology, and he's the former president of the Association of Molecular Pathology and editor-in-chief for Journal of Molecular Diagnostics. Thank you, Dr. O'Leary, for joining us. Next is Dr. Stefan Finn, who is a general internist at the University of Washington in Seattle, who spent multiple decades in VA from 1993 until 2018. And he was the former director of the Health Service Research and Development Program at the Puget Sound VA. He also has an illustrious career in central office as a former chief quality and performance officer, former director of analytics and business intelligence, former director of clinical systems development and evaluation, and also served as the acting chief research and development officer. He's also the former chief of general internal medicine at the University of Washington, and today currently continues as the executive deputy editor of JAMA Network Open. Thank you, Dr. Finn, for joining us. And then finally, we have Rashi Romanoff, who is the current chief executive officer for NAVREF, which is the National Association for Veteran Research and Education Foundation. Dr. Romanoff also has a very illustrious background, having been a former Fulbright scholar and worked in the U.S. State Department as a health foreign officer. She has had several stints in VA, working in central office, previously from 2010 to 2017, and then worked for the Elizabeth Dole Foundation, where she continued on as executive vice president in her last year before returning back to VA, but not to work at VA, but to work for VA in the capacity of chief executive officer of NAVREF since 2023. Thank you, Rashi, for joining us. So today we're going to be talking about the importance of clinical research in VA. And I think we all know that clinical research is a key mission for VA, in addition to providing clinical care and teaching to support veteran care. What I would love to do is just kind of ask the group, and we can go around, and I'm curious if you could share why we should think about research as important for VA, our veterans, and the nation. And also, I'd love to learn of any key milestones that listeners should be aware of that VA research has accomplished. So if okay, I'd love to start with you, Dr. O'Leary.
Let's take a look at this. The data here I'm showing from FY10, but it hasn't really changed substantially from that time. And you can see here that in terms of overall human subjects research in the country, VA plays an incredible part. We're second only to HHS. It's more than a quarter of all of federally sponsored clinical research done anywhere in the federal government. And I think that's extremely important because this work helps to support not only veterans directly, but veterans through collaborations with other agencies, with pharmaceutical companies. And one of the big impacts of this VA clinical research program, therefore, is to bring cutting edge research to the veterans in the VA system before they will see it anyplace else. And this is a major strength of the program, a major strength to veterans. Two, because the VA is engaged in clinical research, and helps to foster it through its research program and funding, it's able to attract world-class investigators, people like Dr. Finn before he came to, and after he came to central office, but world-class investigators from major academic medical centers through the United States. We're talking people with faculty appointments at Harvard, Yale, the University of Washington, Washington University in St. Louis, and on and on and on. And so the result of having a clinical research program, at least in part, is having the world's best physicians available to treat our patients. And that is a remarkable and really, really important part of what we do as VA. And I think people don't have a sense of what fraction of the clinical research enterprise comes from VA. This gives you a sense of that.
That's extraordinary. So it really helps define VA research as one of the national treasures that we should all be proud of.
Absolutely.
Dr. Finn, do you have any comments to add about the importance of VA research?
Hello, Tim. Nice to see you. Tim has talked about the importance of VA research for knowledge generation, which in of itself, I think the science is important. He stressed its relevance to veterans and its immediacy. The topics that research addresses are though some that would not necessarily actually be pursued or attract a lot of funding or attention from other agencies. And by focusing on them, VA has become a leader in many areas. So I would, emphasize that 25% or more than 25% that Tim identified really is focused particularly on topics that are relevant to veterans. Now, these overlap and provide value to the greater society, but areas, particularly mental health, prevention of suicide, management of PTSD, homelessness, all those topics, many of them would not actually be on the radar for other agencies, at least initially when VA undertook to study them. And I think, we can also identify VA as a laboratory, being largely a closed system with, an electronic health record and essentially a really broad range of services. VA is actually really well positioned to study a variety of really difficult topics within its enrolled base of 9 million veterans, and that includes importantly the Cooperative Studies Program, which Tim led for many years, the Health Services Research Program, and often forgotten is VA is actually innovative on the clinical side, and research participates quite strongly in program evaluation within the VA, and the VA is pretty unique in respect that when it spends many millions of dollars on an innovation, programmatic innovation, it often will actually prospectively set aside resources to ask the question, did this program achieve the goals that we wanted? So very few health systems do that, and VA research plays a great deal of, it's very active in that part. I will probably talk more about this, but research is really an essential component of what I think of as the glue of the academic affiliations that we have. We often within VA talk about Omar Bradley's memorandum number 2, which really established the partnerships between medical schools and VA. And as an aside, it's worth reading. It established, a program that's been in place for 70 years, enormously successful, very complex and comprehensive program. The memorandum which established this was 3.5 pages long, and it's written in plain English. I don't think there's an acronym in the document, and it's just amazing what was possible. Even in that memorandum, it recognizes this close affiliation between schools and the VA. And without research, I don't think that would exist. That research, the opportunity to conduct research, maintains recruitment and retention of high caliber medical staff within the VA. And so I think the importance of research on a variety of fronts, and that's, we're focusing mainly on clinical research here, but that includes laboratory research and other research activities within VA, I think are part of the core that makes VA the outstanding organization that it is.
I really appreciate that comment, especially this concept that it's the glue that keeps the academic and VA affiliations going. I mean, I myself was and have always been a pure academician, and felt that there was incredible opportunity and to work at VA as well. And in all of my journeys, I find so many benefits, not just for the people who are leveraging this, but as a whole, it definitely raises the tide for both. And institutions, and I just can't see really the VA being able to do as well as it does without that relationship. So Rashi, I'm curious about your comments, bringing kind of a different perspective, not necessarily on the academic affiliation side, but with industry and other non-VA entities.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, and thanks for inviting me to be here. I think that, kind of echoing off of Dr. Finn and Dr. O'Leary's comments, one of the reasons we need a strong VA and a strong VA research program, and I think this is something in 2025 that feels particularly relevant, and I think is a question that's come up a couple different times, given the environment. But it's a reminder that, veterans need specialized research. Just leveraging, you might be able to say, oh, there's already so many cancer trials that are ongoing, or so many Parkinson's trials, or so many Alzheimer's trials. And while that's true, we know that there are service-connected issues and service-connected connective threads because of military service that make the likelihood of a lot of these conditions and diagnoses increased. And so having specialized research and having researchers that are really dedicated to understanding why military service results in some of these conditions and what kinds of specialized treatments might be needed as a result of that military service is really key if we're going to be able to treat veterans. And that's really a part of our sacred obligation, I think, as a nation for those who have sacrificed. So I think what we do in VA research is absolutely critical to sort of the fabric of our nation and the way we think about military service, which can't be understated. I think other milestones, and Dr. Finn, I love that you brought up that was going to be one of the ones I mentioned. Another one I'll mention, and I will say I'm biased, being that I'm representing NAVREF here, but Another key milestone moment to me is 1988, which people might be saying, oh, like what happened in 1988? That is when Congress and VA came together to really crystallize this concept of the nonprofit, the VA affiliated nonprofit. And Dr. Finn, similarly, I recently reread the statute after being here with NAVREF a couple years, and it's similarly, the language is actually quite short given how complicated the infrastructure can be in some ways. And really, it was this authorization to create a nonprofit that would serve as a flexible funding mechanism. So the fact that the word flexible was put into statute related to the VA, I can't think of too many other times where that's probably happened. But when you think of this piece of legislation that was passed, in the late 80s to authorize this component and what that's meant for the future of the extramural research program at the VA, and for entities like NIH, NCI, DOD, things like the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Program, PCORI, Prostate Cancer Foundation, sort of the list goes on. The ability for VA research to now collaborate with these kinds of external funders has only amplified and complemented what we're able to do within the VA research program. So I think that's one milestone that immediately comes to mind, as well as I will say 2025, which is the 100th anniversary of the VA research program itself. So we would be remiss if we didn't celebrate that as a part of this.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's fascinating that these industry and non-VA partnerships really come generally at no cost to VA and such an incredible opportunity. And Rashi, thank you for being the voice to help the broader public be aware of this. And I think that's a good segue into the next question, which is emphasizing the importance of the public being aware of the importance of VA research and why I think we're having this session. So in May of 2025, just a few months ago, JAMA Internal Medicine published a very important editorial titled VA Research Under Threat. And this was co-authored. You couldn't have any more senior and seasoned and able co-authors to lead this, and included Dr. Finn and Dr. O'Leary, and it was accompanied by Dr. Ken Kaiser and also Dr. David Atkins. Ken Kaiser had previously been Undersecretary of Health, leading a major transformation of VA several decades earlier, and Dr. Atkins actually led VA's Health Service Research and Development Program in central office. In this editorial, again titled VA Research Under Threat, it raised concerns about the possible impact of recent policy changes on the future of VA research. I think this question maybe is primarily for Dr. Finn and Dr. O'Leary. Can you elaborate on this editorial some more on the issues, and what should the public and the policymakers be aware of regarding the future threats that we're facing?
Thinking of this in context of the health of the population in general and the health of the veteran in particular. VA research has brought an amazing number of concepts that are part of everyday practice now. We're talking cardiac pacemakers. We're talking the concept of the CT scan. We are talking many of the precision therapeutics, and in cooperation with industry and with NAVREF and the nonprofits, we've also brought forth things like the first effective shingles vaccine. And so these have been very, very important, not only for veterans, but for the population as a whole. But we have a special obligation to veteran, because when you put on the uniform and you have made a commitment that says the president can send you anywhere he wants at any time with any amount of notice, and you're obligated to go. This is a very special gift that veterans have given every single American. VA research collaborates with DOD in a way that enables VA to seamlessly come to understand the issues that are facing veterans based on that military service. And it does it again, in conjunction with the delivery of care. Now, it's tempting sometimes to try to separate basic research from clinical research, but really they don't separate very well. You know, is it really basic research when you are analyzing a tumor for a genetic alteration that later is being used to treat that veteran based on laboratory testing? It all blends together. And so I think it's really, really important too that we don't get um, overly uptight about whether this is clinical research or whether it's health services research or rehabilitation research or clinical research, because they all blend together. And some of the reorganization that's gone on in recent years of the VA Research Services actually is intended to assure that seamlessness across these different areas that we, for a long time, distinguished based on what the scientist was doing rather than on the diseases that the veteran was coping with. And I think those changes have helped to make VA research, if anything, even stronger. And just to consider something, I don't know whether you should call the Million Veteran Program, for example, a basic science program or a clinical science program. I can say there have been a whole lot of publications, and they are dealing with disease, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, depression, dementia in veterans. These are problems that are seen sometimes uniquely in veterans and sometimes in the overall population, but they're important problems. That's a lot of people. That takes a lot of expert clinical care, which is facilitated by the research that VA is doing and is helping to improve the care of these veterans. And we see that veterans themselves are also deeply engaged in this care. And I'm sure that you, as I, talked to veterans and you asked why they participated in research. And what they told me invariably, we were doing this for other veterans, and we're doing it for their children and our grandchildren. And so the veterans that are participating in the VA research program are giving once again. We owe them. We owe them the best possible research. We owe them the best possible clinical care, because they give the gift that few percent of Americans have given the rest of us is worth the really relatively small cost of VA clinical care and VA research.
I don't think that could be stated any better. Thank you so much, Dr. O'Leary. Now, Rashi, when we start to feel VA research under threat, and a lot of people did get to read that editorial, I can't think of any more prominent person who was out there on the airways trying to make sure the public and our elected legislators were aware that this was too good of a, too important of a resource to dismantle.
So, I think one of the things I would say to your question about what is it that we wish policymakers and the public knew, research, and I think one thing we've said a lot this year, research isn't a nice to have. It's not if you figure everything out, maybe there's some time or there's some resources to do research. That's not what research is about. Research is a critical component of high quality care. And I think one of the things that may have gotten lost, and I'll say this isn't just about veterans research, but I think if there's one thing that the biomedical research community sort of across the United States has probably learned the hard way over the last few months, is that we haven't done a great job of explaining what it is we do, why it's important, how it's all arranged. So, Dr. Finn, whether it's the academic affiliates and this rich tradition of duly appointed personnel, whether it was indirect cost rates, sort of name your poison. There's a lot of within research that as leaders and as organizations and institutions, we really need to make sure that the public and our policymakers really understand why all of this stuff fits together. I often say with the academic affiliates, this didn't just happen overnight. This is, decades long of a tradition that was very intentionally designed to solve a problem following World War II, which was a shortage of providers. And so one of the things we did in response to, I think, a lot of this activity earlier this year was we teamed up with Ipsos, and Ipsos actually also supports part of the Million Veteran Program as a part of the comprehensive survey elements. So they're, familiar with the Office of Research and Development. And what we wanted to do was do, a public market research survey. Let's figure out what is, how do veterans value research? How does the American public value research? And these are the results that we found, but really overwhelming positive support among veterans, among the American public for VA to have resources focused on research for this community. More than 90% of veterans say that it was important for VA clinicians to lead research specifically looking into military connected diagnoses and conditions. This was mirrored more than 85% of the American public. We didn't include the slides here because it starts to get really complicated, but when you sort of splice this further down, even when you go by Democrat and Republican, this has highly amounts of bipartisan support. And so what I often tell people is that, veterans aren't just like, oh, if there's stuff left over, do research. Veterans are demanding access to high quality research as a part of their health care. And so that's been, I think, a really important thing to reinforce with the American public and with policymakers, and really educating them not only about the rich tradition of the pacemaker and the CT scanner and the electronic medical record and all these things that VA has pioneered over the last 100 years, but when you're looking at the conditions that are facing veterans now, really this is the time, I say, to double down in our investment in the VA, because no other institution is really, is covering millions of individuals in rural and metropolitan areas, has 1,200 points of care, has this commitment to the highest quality care, has already made an investment in telehealth tools. So in many ways, at this 100-year moment, this should actually be the moment where we're doubling down in our investment in VA research rather than the opposite. And I think reminding ourselves of what that goal is and why all of this is set up is important, because when you're from the outside looking in, it just seems like a lot of complicated nuances and lots of details. But at the end of the day, we're all rowing in the same direction, which is providing the highest quality care possible to our nation's veterans.
That's fantastic. Again, it just reiterates this importance and I think justification that VA research is a national treasure, and not and definitely for veterans, but also the public at large. So Dr. O'Leary, I have a question for you. Do you think the VA can remain a national leader in clinical research as we move into the future?
Well, I'd like to be optimistic. I think that people are hearing the message that the care that we provide is critical, that the research that we provide is critical. I think we have an amazing cadre of talented researchers and research administrators in VA who will look at what changes occur, and some changes occur with every administration. They will look at what changes occur, and they will focus this work effectively. Finally, I think the reason I am optimistic about VA research is the veteran. The veteran wants VA research. The public knows that the veteran deserves VA research. And in the end, I think VA research will remain strong because the public demands it. And because the public demands it, I think that the dedicated clinicians and researchers that we have will stick through the rough waves that we're having at the moment. Now, obviously, you can't come back and, shake the boat too many times, because the boat will begin to fill up with water. but I sense that the seas are calming. And I don't think that the boat is going to fill. I think it's going to be bailed, and I think that we will see strong sailing ahead in a way that tomorrow's veterans will get better care as a result of VA research than yesterday's veterans, and that we will see continued improvement over time.
That's great. I love this optimistic perspective, and I concur with you that I think we're going to prevail. Dr. Finn, I'm curious if this hope and optimism um, relies on preserving and maybe even growing the academic partnerships. How important is the academic partnerships in all of this as we go into the future?
Like any relationship, obviously, it's got to benefit both sides. One-sided partnerships generally don't succeed, at least for very long. And I had earlier mentioned, I think some of the key points of the research program in terms of recruitment, retention, et cetera. And Tim's talked about the direct and indirect benefits to veterans themselves. One component of a whole package that binds universities to VA. We're not talking about it today necessarily, but the educational programs are critical. And again, called out in the original affiliation agreement. The partnerships are exceedingly close. You've got facilities that are literally next door to one another, and academics and from the VA walking back and forth, which gives not only the VA access to the specialists, but sometimes those specialists are the VA physicians who are going over to assist at the academic centers. It gives VA patients ready access to the expertise of VA affiliates. Many VA medical centers don't have all the high-tech facilities that they require to take optimal care of patients, and they're available at their affiliates. And in terms of research, VA patients have access to trials and other research that are ongoing at universities. Many of the trials, multi-center trials and so forth that are ongoing, would not be available to veterans without those affiliations. And so I think they're absolutely critical. But in most cases within the VA, those individuals actually collaborate closely with physician scientists, and it makes VA research, gives it a much more clinical bent, but also allows the collaboration with affiliates. I think many universities right now, academic medical centers, are preoccupied with a torrent of troubles of their own, and may not be able to give adequate attention to their affiliates. But nonetheless, I think at the faculty levels, it's well recognized the importance of VA, and I think there's very strong support. I can say it. My own medical school, the VA is absolutely critical to the mission of the university, teaching and research, and vice versa. And separation would be to the great detriment of both institutions, and I think that's acknowledged. But I think they're essential to the success of the missions of both the academic medical centers and the academically affiliated VAs.
It's a very convincing argument that the VA is stronger with its academic affiliates. Rashi, as the one who's kind of representing the network of nonprofit corporations that enter into these partnerships with VA, non-VA entities, how important are these partnerships for VA's future research program?
I would say I don't think they've ever been more important. This network of VA affiliated nonprofits annually executes more than $300 million worth of extramural research funds for VA. So, when I go to the Hill, because numbers don't really mean much, sometimes you have to have it to sort of compare to something. About $1 in $3 that the VA is spending on research is actually coming from an external entity, right? Whether it's NIH, DoD, pharmaceutical company, a philanthropic organization, a state level government. So these partnerships not only fuel innovation and fuel investment, but are really contributing to what VA is able to do, the number of staffing they're able to support. So it's absolutely critical. I think one of the things that will be critical, and I think, to sort of borrow from Dr. O'Leary's optimism, because I'm the eternal optimist, I think one of the things that VA has a real opportunity to do now, because I think so many people are thinking about VA research and recognizing its importance and thinking, oh my God, it's contributed to so many medical advancements. It's been around for a century. In this spirit of sort of this is the moment to double down, I think, at its fingertips, VA owns some of the most compelling healthcare data. And so I think whether it's, data from the Million Veteran Program, whether it's data around just veterans, what are they suffering from? What do they need? I think there's opportunities for the VA to really leverage all of this to be able to better select organizations and external partners where it makes a lot of sense for them to have this kind of intentional investment. A really good example of this, actually, when I still was working at the VA, but I've had the opportunity to connect with again with my role at NAVREF is the partnership that VA has with the Prostate Cancer Foundation. It made a tremendous amount of organizational sense for the Prostate Cancer Foundation to partner with the VA because we know that there's a higher prevalence of prostate cancer in our veteran population. And so as a result of these conversations, and I think Dr. Finn, you said this, it was the openness and I think trusting and sharing information, right? Partnerships can't be one-sided. And so in that open dialogue about, well, this is what we need, this is what we have, you saw this historic $50 million investment from the Prostate Cancer Foundation into the VA to really focus on things like precision medicine and tailored treatments and better, tools for diagnosis. And so I think the future of partnerships looks like really focused, targeted. What are the things that, the VA really needs to focus on? What are the things that they're really excited about partnering with industry or with philanthropic groups about, and really hammering in on where those opportunities lie? I think if there's one thing that's true, and again, I don't think this is just VA, I think this is the biomedical research for the nation right now, is everyone's going to have to do more with less. So I think this idea around partnerships and working together organizationally, regardless of the motivators, whether it's, hey, we don't have enough and we're going to have to find a way to figure this out. I think there's a lot of opportunity in that, and there's a lot of excitement that can come from that, which is, I think for me, very thrilling to think about for the future.
This is great. So we're on a positive trajectory here about our future. And I want to tackle a few more questions here as we wrap this session up. I want to talk about the topic of protected time for the physicians and other clinicians who are interested in pursuing research, which was established back in the 1950s. How important is it for us to continue to have this protected time for the VA physicians and other clinicians?
So I'll approach this problem both, having been an administrator, mid-level administrator in a university. I was head of a division now with nearly 500 faculty and on average about a $20 to $25 million research budget. So I've looked at this both as a VA, directing a research program in VA and also on the university side. And I think the term protected time probably is not a great terminology. I think within, many spheres now, it really, I think, has to be, on the university side, we talked about sponsored and unsponsored time. In other words, time that's funded and time that's not. And I think in the modern era of accountability and responsibility, the issue is not sort of giving physicians time to, do whatever. I think really it is protecting or defending the time which they've actually earned, usually through funding from extramural grants. So in a sense, what it really is an issue of accountability. On the university side, for example, the NIH requires all faculty to fill out an effort certification annually and attest to the fact that they are spending their time in accordance with their grant support. In other words, if they've got 10% on a grant, they are actually devoting 10% to that grant. By the same token, I think in the VA, one of the issues where you could, have a merit review grant, but your clinical obligations would be such that you were not given or not provided adequate time to fulfill that commitment to conduct your merit review research. And I think if that's what we're talking about, that's really sponsored time. The VA has actually awarded research time. And it could be also not only from a merit review, as Rashi points out, it could be, contracts and grants with other organizations in which a VA is actually contractually obligated now to provide that research time that organization has agreed to pay for. So I think, VA needs to be able to honor that, those obligations. In terms of providing other time for people to pursue, if you will, unfunded research, that's important. And I think, VA should strive to do that. And actually, the VA has been more successful, I think, in providing that than many universities have. And I think it would be ideal if the VA could continue to try and support unfunded scholarly research. I don't know what Tim's feelings about that is, but at a ground level, we've got to make sure that investigators who have funded projects actually have the time and resources to conduct that research. But the VA actually has a thoughtful approach. Research doesn't always lend itself to the kinds of time accounting, tours of duty that the VA often does. Research can vary over time depending upon the demands of a particular research project. So there has to be some flexibility in that and some trust. I think if you're going to have a research program, you got to have time for people to do the research. It goes without saying.
Well, Dr. O'Leary, as the signatory of many grants that provided this sponsored/protected time, any comments to add?
Well, first thing, I think there are very few VA clinicians that are working 40-hour work weeks. And so we've got to understand that the concept of protected time is asking to protect some time for somebody that is probably already working a lot of hours. And research does take time. You can't do it for free. Some of that time you are engaging with the clinical enterprise. If you are doing clinical research, you are seeing patients, you are having an impact on their healthcare. If you are doing health services research, you are helping to define what are the most efficient and most effective ways to deliver healthcare, and hence making the organization as a whole more responsive in that part of its mission. But the mission of VHA is fourfold, right? It's healthcare, it's education, it's research, and it's emergency response. Research in VA, I think we've made the case, is not a nice to have, and it's a need to have. And if it's a need to have, that means the time has got to be there too. It means that sometimes you are going to be spending, more than that, 10% or whatever, so-called protected time, sponsored time. And sometimes you're going to be spending less than that. But when your patients need you, the physician is going to be there. If they need to show up or answer a call in the middle of the night, I'm not hearing anybody say that's my protected time. I'm not going to take care of those patients. Okay, we do what we need to do to take care of our patients. And it's important that the system recognizes that you can't schedule somebody for 60 hours a week and expect to get that research done, because most of us need to eat and sleep.
Thank you for that. Yes, I have never experienced either at a VA or even academic affiliate where a researcher was too busy to see to tend to a clinical matter. And myself, even though I have quote unquote protected time, if my colleagues are out and they need me to staff the clinic that day, I will certainly make myself available. And I think it's a tenet amongst physician scientists that patient care always comes first. But it's nice to not have your clinic booked 5 days a week, where the only time you can do research is on nights and weekends, and that's not fair to our families, of course. So continue in the spirit of kind of positive direction, Rashi, what advice do you have for those who are interested in research as we move into the future?
Yeah, so I think three things I would say. One, it's a different environment, right, in the last few months when we think about biomedical research. So to young scientists, I think I would say first find your why. And I would say there's no better why than VA's mission. It really is, and I think, Dr. O'Leary, Dr. Finn, Drew, all of us, I think it's such a privilege to work in this military veteran space. I can't think of a place where your why is underlined, bold, italicized more every single day when you walk in and you get to support this community. So I think for young scientists, really finding your why and reminding yourself of your why is really, really important. Second, I think I would say find your tribe. Whether it's, getting to know the researchers and your colleagues and co-investigators and sort of people that you're professionally aligned with, whether it's mentors or lean into opportunities to sort of mentor the next generation of scientists coming up. Also the people around you that are supporting research, whether it's the people that are helping you put the grant together, the finance, so many people. We often say research is a team sport. It's not just one person. You really need this entire ecosystem to make research happen. And I think we're learning a lot of that in the last few months, of when you start to sort of tinker with different things around the edges, there's real impacts to a researcher's ability to do that. So understand the team and understand the roles that people play in making research happen, whether it's your, associate chief of staff for research at the VA, your NPC executive director, people like the Credo, the people in DC that are sitting in those chairs and making decisions about CDAs. Understanding their roles and what motivates them is really important. And finally, I think I would say, and this I might not have said if you would have asked me this question a year ago, but in all honesty, learn about the process and the policy behind research. I think the days of, oh, I don't really follow what's happening in DC, I'm just really focused on what's happening in my lab. I don't know that those days are going to be here for that much longer. I think the things that are happening in DC and in other places are having a direct impact, and be proactive in navigating that change. I think one of the things, and a lot of this remains to be seen, but there may be opportunities, and I believe there are, for veterans research in the next few years. I think when you're seeing people ask questions about things like psychedelics research and cancer and toxic exposures, there's a real interest in, despite everything else, wanting to get our research in the veteran community right. And the more you are informed about what's happening in that environment, the more you can be proactive around opportunities and be ready to shift and be ready to dive into those things when opportunity calls. So those would be my three pieces of advice.
Excellent advice. Dr. Earlier, I'd like to go to your next, and maybe if you can emphasize, there may be an increasing interest amongst academicians to choose VA for their future, for the next phase of their research career, given the uncertainty of NIH funding. So for them or anyone else who, for whatever reason, is thinking about it or in the VA, what advice do you have?
So do it if you can, because VA is a great place to do research. Have amazing colleagues. And if you're interested in improving the healthcare system, I don't know that VA invented healthcare health services research, but sometimes it seems as if it did, because it made a major investment in health services research when other people had never even heard the concept. If you're interested in veterans who have suffered injuries, physical or mental, then there are great opportunities. We have a wonderful group of psychiatry and psychology investigators to help us understand what we think of as the psychological invisible wounds of war. We have an amazing cadre of biomedical engineers and physiologists and rehabilitation specialists and others working within the field of rehabilitation research that do everything from create smart wheelchairs that rival the Tesla automobile, self-drive the way we would like it to be, and as well as making it possible for people to recover their own capacity after a traumatic head injury or a stroke. So we have these tremendous colleagues out there. But finally, we have this tremendous group of patients as well. And I'll speak to the clinical researcher here. There is no better group of folks to work with, because yes, they are interested in research that will help them personally, but just about every veteran cares every bit as much about the folks that are going to come after them. They have this tremendous generosity of spirit that one doesn't always find anywhere else. And the people that want to serve veterans are the kinds of people you would like to be with. So, yes, we have some research funding available, and that's wonderful and necessary. But when you go home at the end of the day, it's not so much about what you were able to bring in the way of funding as what you were able to accomplish. And what you're able to accomplish depends not only on yourself and the couple of people that you may be able to hire, they depend on your colleagues, the ideas, the interchange that goes on. You want to go home having worked in a job that you love doing. And I think VA is a place you can work in a job that you love doing. And you won't feel like so many of our academic investigators, after competing in the NIH system for 4 or 5 or 6 years, you won't decide it's time to go out into private practice because you're just tired of doing this rat race with nobody caring. People in VA care, our patients care, our administrators care, your colleagues care. And it's a great reason to come work for VA.
Wow. I hadn't thought about it that way. And I definitely do live in that world, Dr. O'Leary. I do feel that I'm cared for, and I know that what I'm doing has purpose. Thank you for highlighting that. Dr. Flynn, anything else?
The tendencies to focus on the short term and the sort of crises that are present today. There were, the biggest, probably you alluded to earlier, Drew, was back in the early 90s when actually the entire VA system was under threat, not just the VA research program. And it was Ken Kaiser's leadership that helped not only enable the VA to survive, but actually to prosper and become recognized as one of the best healthcare systems in the nation. And the research program prospered along with it. Unfortunately, and the same is true with NIH funding, with pay lines sometimes at 25% and sometimes at 4%. Research tends to be cyclical. I think going back to what Rashi said, for those individuals who really have a commitment and an affection for what they're doing and are committed for it because it's something they care about, I think those are the individuals who do survive the difficult times and go on to be very successful. So that I think my point here is, as bleak as things may seem at this moment, that in no way, I think, portends what the future will be. This will pass, and VA's, got as we've all, I think, agreed about, a strong future. It may be in some ways a different future. Organizations change over time, but I think it's a good one.
All right. Well, we've covered a lot, and I think we're in a good place right now. Are there any other comments that we want to share before I wrap up?
Yeah, I'd like to comment. You alluded to the issue of unfunded research earlier, and I think it's an important question. Not all research that should be done is funded. In fact, some of the research that needs to be done isn't funded and isn't likely to get funded. I remember much earlier in my career, there were a couple of folks in, I think, Australia that became convinced that a bacterium called Helicobacter pylori was responsible for ulcer disease. They couldn't get funding. They couldn't even get it published because it was breaking an axiom that earlier investigators had come to believe in. Of course, later they did get the free trip to Stockholm and a Nobel Prize because they were not dissuaded from doing what they thought they needed to do by the fact that nobody else thought it was important. If you, as a clinician or a basic scientist, think something is important, you should figure out how to make it happen. If it's important enough, you will find the way. And so I'd like to say, for those people that, apply for funding and it doesn't come, that doesn't mean that you're not right. Sometimes the system doesn't do the right things. It does on average. I mean, globally, you get great results from it. But, we tend to cut off the ends. And so be persistent and figure out how to make it happen. So,
And I'll underscore that and say there are other funders besides the VA, just to do my plug for NAVREF and what we're charged to do. Lots of people want to fund the VA. So if you get a no from one place, find your local NPC executive director and say you have an idea. That's part of their job, is to help get you the resources you need. So you set me up for that, so I had to take advantage.
There are things that can be done in the VA that can't be done anywhere else. And Tim knows this, that back in 2004, when the idea of the Million Veteran Program was floated, no one thought that could be done. And in fact, the NIH was somewhat hostile to the idea because the NIH was planning its own very large population-based biobanking genomic program. That actually never went anywhere. And the VA was able, for all the reasons that Tim highlighted and described earlier, the VA was able to do that and to do it successfully. And now you've got the NIH researchers coming to the VA wanting to take advantage of that resource. And so it's, you know, the VA, you can do great things in VA. And I think it's always a mistake to underestimate what's possible in VA, funded or not. It's a remarkable institution, and I think what we all share is a strong affection for VA and the people who work there and the patients who receive their care there. So thanks for including me in this very enjoyable conversation.
Oh, the honor is ours, Dr. Finn. Again, we can't really find anyone more experienced than yourself, and also Dr. O'Leary. And Rashi, thank you for making time to join us. I think we can definitely look to a bright future. I'm very pleased to have learned that Congress is planning to preserve VA's research budget, and in fact gave us a little bit of a bump for next year. And that goes to show that the public and the legislators that represent their constituents are aware and preserving this. And I think that hopefully our non-VA sponsors and non-VA physician scientists who are interested in coming to VA will hear this message and find a tribe that can teach them more about the details, because unfortunately the mainstream media is just no longer a reliable source for much of anything, let alone how VA research operates. So with that said, thank you, Rusty. Thank you, AVAHO, for putting this together and prioritizing a session about VA research.
On behalf of AVAHO, Drew, I'd like to thank you for doing an amazing job moderating and keeping this open dialogue going. I can't say enough about our panelists, their compassion, their love for what they do, their devotion to the veteran. Those are the things why most of us have spent our entire career working for the VA. I knew every day I had an opportunity to improve a patient's life, and it was upon me every day to take advantage of that opportunity. And I cannot share enough thanks for you guys for highlighting the importance of research and what it means to the VA and to our nation. So thank you all. I really appreciate it.